Welcome, friends. My name is Olivia Mattis, and I'm delighted that you've joined us today for another one of our Sunday programs. We have a nice big crowd with us today, and I'm so delighted. Every week we present programs on rescue, resistance, refugees, issues like that. And today I'm delighted that we're partnering now for the second time with the Centro Primo Levi to tell a story of Italy. We are lucky to have the CEO of the Centro Levi as our moderator today, and that's Natalia Indrimi. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Olivia. I'd like to thank Olivia Mattis and the Susan Mendes Foundation for inviting us to co-present. Thank our speakers for accepting the invitation and all of you who are attending for being here this Sunday. So I'll say a few words about CPL, the Centro Primo Levi, and our activity. We have many research, publishing, and teaching projects. And for over 20 years, we have created a bridge between historical research and public debate. So this middle space is very much what we're interested in, and in an attempt not to simplify the complexity of history, but at the same time enabling a public conversation. One of our main topics of interest is fascism and the persecution of the Jews. The story of the Italian Jewish exiles, some in North America, another few thousand in South America, Palestine, various European countries, North Africa, is an important aspect of this story, is a less studied one, and I think provides some very important context to understand what happened in Italy after 1938. And I think some of these issues will be addressed by our speakers. I will introduce our guests. First of all, Gianna Pontecorboli is a journalist, and she has moved to New York in 1979, where she became a correspondent, a US and UN correspondent for many Italian publications. So she still writes for a Swiss paper, the Corriere del Ticino, and an Italian publication that has more of a literary bent. Most importantly for our invitation today is that she's the author of a wonderful book, A me ricordo, The Italian Jewish Exiles in America, that our center has published in 2016 after the Italian edition came out. The book is a collection of interviews and conversations with Italian Jews who came to this country. Some of them stayed and raised their family, and their families remained here, and some of them went back. And it makes us, it's really important documents because it makes us see how difficult it is to align the collective and individual experience, and at the same time enter in the human sphere of what it means to drop everything, pack, and leave your own country and your own home. Annalisa Capristo is an historian of the consequences. Her focus has been the consequences of the racial persecution on intellectuals and scholars, how the universities were quickly, as it happened in Germany, in other countries in Europe, quickly emptied of Jewish scholars and professors, and how this worked specifically for Italy. She has started a research in the early 2000s, which at a time when there was hardly any work done on this topic. And I must say, she's been a reference for the center and for many other scholars in this effort. She really opened a ground. And this is I think something that has to do both with her talent as a scholar and her civic spirit that I feel like is really important to mention here. Massimo Calabresi is the Time magazine's Washington bureau chief, And I think we have all read his reports from various parts of the world for many years. He is with us today, and I thank him for accepting the invitation, partly as the son of Judge Guido Calabresi, who is one of the Italian Jews who came as a child into this country, and his family made their life in America, and became a prominent jurist and judge, and also has been a very important figure in the development of our center. And he has always been a reference. He was our guest many times. And you will all hear him in the video that we're about to present. 2 words. I want to say something about Massimo's, this is very important in both cases. Gianna and Massimo are journalists, are people who observe and record the present. And I think that there are cases in which the echoes of history, of personal history, become very meaningful in our present work. And it is just a circumstance, but also is something that is noteworthy here. I will say 2 words about the video you're about to watch. Is one of the CPL mini docs. There is a whole page. There's short documentaries that we produce in connection with our books, with the books we publish. And also I sent in the chat box links to both Gianna and Annalisa's books, to the mini docs, and to a broader page of our website about the Italian Jewish experience in America. So thank you, and we'll watch the video now.
L'idea di scrivere Me ricordo mi è venuta subito quando sono arrivata negli Stati Uniti alla fine degli anni 70 e ho conosciuto tanti di questi esuli che erano molto integrati nella società americana, ma in un certo senso erano un po' diversi e mi hanno incuriosita e mi è venuta la voglia di raccontare una storia che nel suo complesso non era mai stata raccontata. Per tutti questi ebrei italiani che sono arrivati non è stato facile ambientarsi. Non parlavano la lingua, ovviamente non c'erano più i soldi che avevano avuto in Italia, quindi si sono dovuti quasi tutti accontentare di sistemazioni molto modeste. E poi gli ebrei americani non riuscivano a capire questi strani ebrei che erano appena arrivati e che non parlavano Yiddish. Avevano delle tradizioni e una cultura completamente diverse. E quella che è stata la loro forza quando sono arrivati qui è stato di riunirsi e di aiutarsi moltissimo gli uni con gli altri. Gran parte dei protagonisti della storia che racconto nel libro non c'è più. Sono rimasti figli e sono rimasti nipoti. Sono tutti ormai americani, perfettamente integrati nella vita americana, però devo dire qualcosa è rimasto. Tutti rifugiati, anche se hanno avuto una carriera magnifica, non hanno mai dimenticato questa esperienza che li ha formati.
Both my father and my grandfather were fiercely anti-fascist from the beginning. My father wanted to leave when it became clear that Mussolini was not going to fall. What had happened was that with the help of Levi, a professor in Turin, a fellowship had been arranged at Yale through the Damien Foundation, I think. So we immediately went off to Genoa with these trunks and got on board on the 8th of September and then arrived in New York on the 16th. When we went to New Haven, we were outsiders in every possible way. We were Jews, but not like most American Jews. We were Italian, but not like most American Italians. And yet, we were completely different from all of the Yale people. And that, my brother and I felt immediately, but not as a negative thing. We were ourselves. The most important part of my legal education is that I'm a refugee, that I'm an immigrant, and that I'm an outsider. When Anne and I were married, at the bridal dinner, my father surprised everybody by drinking a toast to Mussolini and saying if it were not for him, Guido would not have met Anne, and Paul, my brother, would not have met Celia. There is something that we owe to that scoundrel because it made us people who were different, who were unorthodox, who did not fit. And that's the kind of scholar and judge that I hope that I am.
I wish to thank the Susa Mendes Foundation and the Centro Primo Levi, New York, for the invitation to participate in this program on the Italian Jewish exiles from fascist Italy as a consequence of the race laws promulgated in 1938. When we consider this topic in its historical context, we must bear in mind at least two aspects. The first aspect, this is a forced migration, not a voluntary exile. Italian Jews fleeing fascist Italy were pushed outside the country by the restrictions imposed by persecution, while foreign Jews were ordered to leave Italy, Libya, and the Italian Aegean possessions by March 1939. The category of foreign Jews included those who had acquired Italian citizenship by concession after January 1st, 1919. Their citizenship was revoked and many found themselves stateless, constrained to confront the further difficulties of recovering documents necessary for expatriates, obtaining a visa, and finding accommodation outside Italy. Immigration represented the only way to escape from the increasingly burdensome professional and social restrictions that were in place at the time in Italy, and that constituted a very real civil debt for citizens of Jewish origin. The alternative to which the majority had to submit was the loss of civil and political rights, professional demotion, social exclusion, economic impoverishment, and complete banishment from scientific and cultural arenas. To give an idea of the impact and the consequences of race laws on the Italian Jews and on the foreign Jews who found a precarious refuge in interwar Italy, I have prepared some slides. Slide 1, newspapers headlines on July 15, 1938. The fascist regime launched its anti-Semitic and racist campaign. The so-called Manifesto on Race at point 9 stated that Jews do not belong to the Italian race. Slide 2, newspapers headlines on September 2, 1938. The first anti-Jewish race laws were announced. Italy exiles Jews entering since 1919. Measure includes those who have become citizens. Slide 3, newspapers headlines on September 3, 1938. All Jewish students, teachers, professors had to be expelled from Italian public school, universities, and cultural institutions starting from the upcoming school year. Slide 4, Newspapers headlines on November 11, 1938. The definitive race laws were announced. The fascist government issued a series of provisions regulating with separate bills the exclusion of Jews from all sectors of public life and most sectors of private life. Slide 5. Anti-Semitic cartoon from magazine The Defense of Race, illustrating the prohibitions against the Jews. There were Italian Jews who committed suicide as an act of desperation and extreme protest and rebellion against the injustice. Slide 6. This is the case of the distinguished publisher Angelo Fortunato Formigini, who jumped off the tower of Ghirlandina in Modena on November 29, 1938. Some autobiographical narratives address the pain and loss experienced by Italian Jews, as well as their sense of betrayal. I mention here in slide 7, 8, and 9, some of these narratives. Slide 7, Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco. Castelnuovo Tedesco was one of Italy's leading contemporary composers. He settled in the US in July 1939 with the help of Italian conductor Arturo Toscanini and Russian-American violinist Jaska Heifetz. In the US, Castelnuovo Tedesco became a film music composer. Slide 8, Ugo Fano. Physicist Ugo Fano was a pioneer in atomic theory and radiation physics. He immigrated to the United States in 1939 with his wife and continued his work at several institutions, including the National Bureau of Standards and the University of Chicago. Slide 9, Bruno Rossi. When he was dismissed from his post, Rossi was professor of experimental physics at the University of Padua. At that time, he was a scientist of international renown with many contacts abroad. After fleeing Italy, Rossi went to Denmark and then to England before eventually reuniting with Enrico Fermi in the United States. He taught at Cornell University and then joined the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos. After the war, Rossi became a professor at MIT. If only a minority of Italian Jews chose to flee, it was not because the fascist persecution was bland, but because there were huge objective obstacles that hindered emigration, which only a social and intellectual elite was able to overcome. Here I would like to briefly mention two exiles who had to face many obstacles to settle in the US. Slide 10, philologist and Hispanist Ezio Levi d'Ancona, professor at Naples University and a member of the Hispanic Society of America in New York. Ezio Levi and his wife fled from Italy on December 10, 1939, traveling on a temporary visa, which would allow them to go to New Orleans. Levi had been invited to attend the Modern Language Association Congress. Then he had to face a lot of difficulties in obtaining a job and a permanent visa. After months of uncertainty, in September 1940, Ezio Levi found a job as professor of Italian in Wellesley College in Boston. Some months later, however, he succumbed to an untreated ulcer. Slide 11, Saul Steinberg, the Romanian-American cartoonist and illustrator, best known for his work for The New Yorker. He arrived in Milan in 1933 to study architecture, having left his native Romania and its virulent anti-Semitism. His first years in Italy, which he would later remember as a paradise, turned rapidly into hell in 1938. The race laws deprived him of income, a profession, and a legal residence. Forced to live as an unwanted foreign Jew and unable to obtain the visas necessary to leave Italy, in 1941 he was arrested and spent several weeks in an internment camp in Tortoreto in the Abruzzo region before finally managing to flee the country and after many vicissitudes settle in the US. Steinberg is well known for his maps. The most famous is the view of the world from 9th Avenue, published on the cover of New York in 1976. Here you can see another beautiful map entitled Autogeography. It includes both Milano and Tortoreto, the place where he was interned in May-June 1941. After September 1943, all Jews who were trapped in the territories under control of the German authorities and the Italian Social Republic were under the threat of arrest, internment in concentration camps, and deportation to Auschwitz. To put it in a nutshell, fascist Italy played a relevant role in the history of anti-Jewish persecution, and this role must be considered and analyzed far beyond the myth of good Italian. The second aspect The Jewish emigration provoked by fascist persecution was a relevant phenomenon considering above all the history of Italy in the 20th century. It resulted in, among other things, an intellectual loss that negatively and deeply impacted the scientific development of the whole of Italian culture in the post-war years. Emilio Segre, winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1959, who settled in the United States in 1938, talked of a draining of the blood of Italian culture that has slowed the progress of the country. It was a significant and peculiar phenomenon, also considering the history of Jewish diaspora and the history of the countries of destination, UK, US, Brazil, Argentina, and other countries of Latin America, Palestine under British mandate, and so on. In spite of this, for a long time, this issue had been somewhat neglected in historical studies. In recent years, the situation has changed and historical research entered a new phase. However, much remains to be done. This is a kaleidoscope of personal and professional story which deserves to be fully reconstructed. Thanks.
Thank you, Annalisa. Gianna?
First of all, I would like to thank very much Susa Mendes Foundation and Olivia Mattis for inviting me. My interest for this story was in the beginning a personal interest because a brother of my mother and a cousin of my mother came to the United States in 1939 because of the racial laws. And they tried to convince my family, my father and my mother, to come along, but my father had a business and he didn't want to leave Italy. When I arrived in 1978, the surrounding in which my uncle and the cousin of my mother, who had come back in Italy in the meantime, were living was still intact. And I met all of those Italian Jews who came here in 1938, and I was amazed and very much interested by their story. I remember once I went to visit one of them, and on the way back, I said to my husband, "This is an amazing story. I will have to write a book." But the time was not ripe yet. Those people were not ready probably to tell their stories. And also there was not the interest there is now in this part of the history. So I delayed. Finally, about 10 years ago, I believed the right moment had arrived. And I tried to interview as many of them as I could. What I tried to do was to vary the interviews because many of these people, about 2,000 people came, were intellectual or professional, but many of them were also young people or very small business owner. What I tried to do in my interviews was to emphasize the human side of the story, because even the one who had later a great success were overwhelmed by a tragedy which was bigger than they were. When I started to write it, I had many doubts, and finally I decided to anchor the personal story in an historic background, which is necessarily abbreviated, but I try to do it as correct as possible. For all of them, the decision to leave was a difficult one. The family had to split. There was the visa to be obtained, the money to be found and transferred. For many, the voyage was full of bad surprise, and it even lasted 2 years. On the arrival too, it was not easy for them. Settling down was difficult. They had to rebuild their life. The doctors and the lawyers had to give the exam to be able to to do their trade, and many of them couldn't do, and they ended up selling pots. The professor, as Annalisa said, had a lot of difficulties in finding new position in the United States because most of the jobs had already been taken by the Germans who had come before them. But when they arrived, they reacted helping each other a lot. And they also found the help of a few people who had arrived before because they were anti-fascist. One of them was Max Ascoli, who was teaching at the new school, and he had both the money and the connection to help them, and he did it very generously. What amazed me in the whole story was how many gifts this tiny minority could give to the adopted country, and how important they were, mainly after the war, to develop a new kind of relationship between Italy and the United States, not only in science, but also in business, in art, in music. When the war started, everybody tried to give their contribution. The young people went to war in the military. A lot of people went to Washington to help the American government in its war effort with their knowledge of how Italy was, how the economy was, how the society was working, and they were really very useful. A few of them went to Los Alamos to help for the construction of the atomic bomb. Many of them also spoke at the microphone of the Voice of America to reach, speaking in Italian, to the Italian resistance. Tullio Zevi, who then becomes the head of the Italian Jewish community in Italy, was one of them. Another one was Giuliano Gerbi. And they reached a big audience in Italy. At the end of the conflict, the impact of Italian Jews became even more important. There are many stories I could tell. I want to select a few, which in my opinion are very significant. The new Italian economy was trying to emerge to the disaster of the war and to penetrate to the American market. So the Italian consulate and the Italian embassy were always referring them to Enrico Pavia, who was a lawyer, and to George Funaro, who was an accountant. They were working together in the same small office, but they had something very important. They were able to speak Italian. They knew Italian law and Italian economy. They were able to prepare contracts which were good for the Italian and were good also for the American counterpart. They prepared tax reports which were good for the IRS. So thanks to their help, the movies by Vittorio De Sica and the beauty of Sophia Loren could reach the American screen, even if Hollywood was always boycotting foreign movies. And even more important, the Fiat cars, the Olivetti typewriters, the Ferragamo handbag became familiar to the American consumer. Max Ascoli, on his part, was still active, and thanks to the Marshall Plan, created in 1950, a new exhibition called Italy at Work at the Brooklyn Museum, and he presented to the Americans the beauty of the new Italian design. In a different field, Italian opera was almost unknown to America's music lover until Dario Soria created a new recording company who introduced them to Verdi, Rossini, and an unknown Greek young soprano named Maria Callas. The music was recorded in Italy, but the records were produced in the United States, and they were immediately incredibly successful. The road, in a way, worked also both ways. From his gallery in New York City, the art dealer Leo Castelli was able to introduce to Italy and to the American world all the new, vibrant American art, Rauschenberg, Jasper Jones, Jackson Pollock. To conclude, I would like to share a little memory. I still remember that as a teenager in Italy, I was listening, fascinated, to the radio program in which the musician, journalist, and painter Renzo Nissim, which was nicknamed after the first DJ in history, introduced to the Italian listener the marvels of jazz and American swing music. And now I hand the floor to Massimo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gianna. It's wonderful to hear all of those stories, some of which are familiar from my youth and others of which are new. I do want to thank Olivia for convening this program, and especially Natalia for all the work that she does at Centro Primo Levi, but also thank you, Annalisa and Gianna, for the work you're doing. I really don't have much to add, I don't think, except one observation, having grown up in the shadow of World War II and the Holocaust, very much in the world that Gianna and Annalisa have described here in the United States. I was fortunate to know both of my Italian grandparents, Massimo and his wife Bianca, Massimo was a cardiologist who, as my father noted in Gianna's video, had arranged a fellowship to come to the United States. His wife Bianca was a scholar in her own right, taught Dante here in the United States. I also knew both of Massimo's older sisters, Cecilia and Renata. Renata, Gianna mentioned Max Ascoli. Renata was a PhD psychologist, also driven out of the profession in Italy because of the racial laws that Annalisa mentioned. And she found work here in New York at the New School, thanks very much to Max Ascoli. And of course, in addition to my father, my uncle Paul Calabresi was an esteemed professor of medicine. So I was very fortunate to grow up in this world of first generation immigrants who had fled fascism and the persecution of Jews in Italy. I would just say that it's striking to me to see the further we get from those events, how the public discourse is changing around authoritarianism, around fascism, around the Holocaust. And so I think the work that you all are doing, Jana, in documenting these stories, Annalisa in writing objectively about the historical facts and analyzing what actually happened and why, and especially Natalia and Olivia for heading organizations that foster that kind of work. I do think at this moment, at this particular moment, the work you're doing is very, very valuable. So thank you all for doing that, and I'll hand it back to Olivia now.
Thank you, Massimo, and all of our speakers today. So Natalia will be moderating your questions in just a few moments. But right now I want to tell you about what's coming up here at the Sousa Mendes Foundation. Next week, we have our final program of 2021, and it's our virtual gala where we are honoring an amazing hero. Her name is Judy Feld-Carr. She's a Canadian woman who took it upon herself back in 1973 to be a rescuer. Well, she didn't know that's what she would become, but she ended up spending the next 28 years working in secret to rescue the Jews of Syria who were trapped in a terrible situation. So I do hope you will join us next week for this very, very special program. Again, our last program of the year. It is our fundraiser, so there are different ticket levels, but we also have a sponsor who is providing free tickets for anyone for whom that is an issue. So literally everybody should be there. We want to give Judy Feld-Carr a very large audience, and I hope you'll all join us. So right now I'm going to turn the floor back to Natalia, who's going to moderate your questions.
Thank you, Olivia. So I'm trying to combine a little bit some of these questions, and I think the first that came through, and they seem really relevant to Annalisa's research, is how did some of these scholars come to the US? Did they have institutional support? Did they have communal support? Did they have sponsorship? Can you speak a little bit about this, Annalisa?
Yes. People fled from Germany, from Austria, from other countries in Central and Eastern Europe before the Italian Jews. And so there were two possibilities for obtaining an academic position in the United States. The first was by recourse to personal contacts, as in the case, for instance, of the mathematician Guido Fubini. He succeeded in obtaining an invitation from the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, thanks to the intervention of Tullio Levi-Civita by way of Oswald Veblen. The second was by request sent to organization whose scope was to coordinate and finance the recruitment of teachers fleeing from Europe, such as the Emergency Committee in Aid of Displaced Foreign Scholars in New York, or the Society for Protection of Science and Learning in England. But it was very difficult at that time, because in 1939, the war is now in starting, and so leaving Italy is very, very difficult. Just people that have a good network and was of international renown could have some chance. And so it is very, very difficult. The archive of these institutions are very rich in documentation, in documenting this flight. And so it is a very important source for historians.
There are a couple of other historical questions, and I'm sorry if we end up not really distributing them. Then you will leave the final thought. It will be a little better distributed. But Annalisa, what kind of numbers are we talking about? How many Jews left Italy?
We do not have a precise number, probably about 6,000, 8,000 people. And so some people, about 2,000 perhaps, 2,500 to the United States, 500, 600 to Palestine under British mandate, other people to Latin America, and so Argentina, Brazil.
At about 1,000 in Brazil, I know the census was, Another Campagnano made the census of the Italians were arriving.
Yes, but all numbers are still growing probably because the historical research on this topic is growing, is in progress, and so probably we have to update all the information on this topic.
Right. I think it's just useful to know this is a community of 40,000 people plus about 14,000 foreign Jews who live quite immediately after the racial laws. So we're talking about a huge percentage of people who had the possibility of living and they decide to drop everything back and go to another country. And that's also, that was a class that was kind of the backbone of a small community. And I think that also played a role in what happened after. There is another question. So I think that there's some confusions about places and numbers. A question, where are all these Jews in the north of Italy, since we learned last week that the Jews in the south, such as Tuscany, were protected and saved from the Germans by the Italians? I think it's a little confused. In 1943, after the armistice, Mussolini, with the German support, created the Italian Social Republic that went from south of Naples to the Alps. And this was the area of danger, so to speak, as the Allied army proceeded north. And just to give a sense, by the end of 43, the Allied army was right above Naples and stayed there for a long time. In June 44, arrived in Rome. So during that period, the deportations begin. So, and about
Natalia, I would jump in and say one of my grandfather's sisters and his mother were hiding in Florence very much during that period, as well as others who were further north hiding in the Alps. So very much the experience of that danger period in Italy.
Right, and it was a period in which people who were fortunate went into hiding. The community of Florence, in spite of the alarm that the roundup and deportation of the Jews of Rome should have created, and probably did create, but in spite of that, also the Jewish community of Florence suffered a tremendous roundup that included the chief rabbi, Rabbi Cassuto, and many of the leaders of the community. So it was it's a complex situation, but just to give an idea that and the people who actually were the Jews who were immediately rescued were in the very south, in this very large concentration camp of Ferramonti that had already received an order of deportation north, but fortunately the Allied army arrived before that could be implemented. So there is, I think, there is another, this is a complex question. I don't know if there is time to answer, but maybe, I don't know if Annalisa, you want to give a shot at it, speak a little bit about Jews who were active in the fascist party.
Yes, this is a big question. And so there is an entire room of books on this problem. Also, I can suggest to read to start reading something on this, the special issue of the journal Quest 2007 and 17 on the Italian fascist Jews. There is an excellent introduction by Michele Sarfatti and several very interesting essays by young scholars on this topic. For the fascist Jews, the enactment of racial laws was an hard blow, because all their world went in ruin. And there is the case of Ettore Ovazza, who was murdered in northern Italy during the period of the Italian Social Republic and the German rule on this part of Italy. He was murdered in an horrible way, because he would choose to stay in Italy. And so it is a tragedy, also because many of these fascist Jews or former Jews converted to Catholicism, and so they were not. They were no more Jews, but considered of Jewish race. And so it is a very complicated matter. I can give some bibliographical references to the people who are interested in this topic.
Yeah, I think the Quest volume, the magazine of the Center for Contemporary Jewish Documentation
is open access.
Yeah, well, I'm going to send the link. Is a good way to start.
So right now, let's turn back to our speakers for their final thoughts, and we are going to start with Massimo.
Thank you, Olivia, and thank you again for organizing this, and Natalia and Gianna and Annalisa. Just one thought spurred by some of the commentary and some of the materials that have been shown. I early in my career, with the family background that I had, raised my hand at my employer to cover what were then the ongoing wars in the Balkans in the late 90s, from 95 through 99, very much out of a desire to report on conflict and authoritarianism in Europe. And one of the, it was a formative and interesting set of experiences. One of the observations that I had while there, covering not just the Balkans, but Central Europe, was the efforts to sustain and build knowledge in the West about the continuing communities in that part of the world, that it isn't just a matter of the story of those who are in the United States and those who are in Israel, but that there are communities throughout the world that are sustained in a number of ways by the diaspora around the world, but also by the intellectual and historical work documenting those communities. And that it's, I found it very important and moving to see that the story is broader than just two communities. So in that light, thank you again, Natalia and Annalisa and Gianna and Olivia for the work.
Okay, Annalisa, what would you like to say?
Yes, thank you all. It is a very interesting opportunity to discuss this topic, which is to me of great interest to better understand Italian history, the history of this particular minority who spread into the world, and the story of the country of destination. And so we have a lot to study and to research, and I do continue this into this way. Thank you.
And Gianna, I've known you since you came on our trip, Journey on the Road to Freedom, retracing the footsteps of Sousa Mendes and the refugees of Nigeria.
Sure. What I really think, and I follow after the word of Massimo, I really think that mostly today is important to talk about yesterday migration. When we think about what is happening in today's world, how many population are forced to leave their home and their life because of political or religious reason, we cannot avoid thinking about the past. I think it's necessary to understand their suffering and to discover how many gifts these poor migrants can give to the country who opened their door to them. I am, of course, very grateful to the people who allowed me to interview them. And I think they gave to me, and I hope to others, many reasons to think about it. And I'm also grateful to Centro Primo Levi, who helped me a lot with my research, and to an incredible woman who is Katerina Ginsburg. She's a granddaughter of Natalia Ginsburg, the writer, and she's also the niece of one of the refugees. And she helped me a lot in the research and pushing me to finish the book. So I really hope it can be useful to everybody. Thank you.
And where can we obtain your book? Can we get it from the Centro Primo Levi website?
Yes,
Yes, of course.
I have sent links to everything, all our books, and it's, hopefully people will be interested in reading them.
Fantastic. So thank you all. Thanks to our speakers, our moderator, Natalia Indrimi of the Centro Primo Levi, and our loyal audience that we love so much. We hope to see you next week for our final program of 2021. See you then. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.